So I was thinking about the intrinsic value of beauty, and I was remembering that in my early Christian history class that I took at seminary, I learned that beauty was considered an attribute of God, that all that is beautiful is a demonstration of God's divine beauty. Ambrose and Augustine affirmed that anything beautiful, a painting or a sculpture, the sunrise, maybe morning mist, and in particular, a person. All these things are reflections of divine beauty, the essence of God. And in the Orthodox tradition that has icons, I'm sure if you've seen them, these paintings that are in their churches, they believe that the essence of the living thing that is represented in the icon is present right there. And so when I was in Greece, I saw how this translates into religious practice, because there were these little prayer shrines all over the place. In some towns where there were only 2,000 people, there were 365 shrines. So it's an important part of their faith and of their culture. And as I observed on the street walking along, people would just pop in and they would light a candle, spread some light, and they would kiss the icon and say a prayer. Because somehow divine beauty was in each frame. I got a glimpse of just how prevalent this idea is in some traditions when I read an article about a nun's love for Lionel Messi. And for those of you who haven't heard of him, he is a soccer player, or a football player to be more accurately, from Argentina, who currently plays for Barcelona. And apparently he is considered the best player in the world, and by some as the greatest of all time. And according to an article in Inquisitor, this nun, Sister Lucia Karam, said that Messi was a reflection of God's perfection. And she says, "For me, the evidence for the existence of God is manifested in goodness and beauty, and when I see Messi play, I see that." One looks entranced, like by a beautiful painting or a sunset when one faces Messi. I'm not saying he's God, but he's a reflection of God's perfection. He dazzles everyone. I got a chuckle out of that. But as I went on in the article, her love for Messi and the beauty of his art sometimes clouds her judgment of his rivals, especially Cristiano Ronaldo, who has been considered the best player in recent years. And of Ronaldo, she says this: "Is Messi an angel and Ronaldo the devil? Well, Messi has the virtue of being a great player, but he is also a good person. He is humble. Cristiano plays football very well, but he has very cocky and unfriendly attitude. He's not my greatest enemy. I think he plays very good football, but there is not harmony in him." So the great rivalry between Messi and Ronaldo continues with this nun on the sideline. And I don't know if I would go that far in my understanding of how beauty is divine. But I do think there is something to this idea. Even though I'm a Protestant and out of the evangelical tradition, where fancy sanctuaries and religious art is kind of frowned upon, when it comes to beauty, I kind of gravitate towards that Orthodox tradition, who says that beauty is synonymous with truth and goodness. And you can see this demonstrated in the story of creation, because in one of the stories, God looks on the world after each day, and the phrase is, "And God saw that it was good." The word in the Hebrew can be translated either as good or as beautiful. So it could have as easily been, "And God saw that it was beautiful." The thing about true beauty is that there is something ineffable about it. That means it's something that we just can't put into words. When you see something that is truly beautiful, you sometimes want to cry, at least I do. beautiful art, poetry, sculpture, plays, music, whatever. They reach you viscerally, in the place beyond words, in a center of your being that you can't articulate, that space where you just know. And it feels kind of like a knot in your stomach, or perhaps more accurately, it feels like a knot in your soul. And it brings joy at what is so lovely, and a sadness at how things are broken. But if we look closely, there is beauty in the brokenness as well. It's like the Japanese aesthetic tradition called wabi-sabi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And if Pat and Art were here, I would have asked, but wabi-sabi. It accepts the transience and the imperfection of beauty. Andrew Juniper, who studies this art form, describes it this way. If an object of expression can bring about within us a sense of serene melancholy and a spiritual longing, then that object could be said to be wabi-sabi. Another way it is described as flawed beauty. It's natural for us when we view the world to concentrate on these flaws, to sit in the melancholy. But that only serves to harden our hearts to the beauty that is inherent. If we close ourselves to divine beauty that surrounds us, the presence of holy mystery that is experienced everywhere, I think we lose a part of our own humanity. When we only see what is wrong and needs fixing, what is broken and needs mending, what is tragic and needs our endurance, we lose the light that shines in the darkness. We stifle the connections to each other and the divine that are our salvation. Beauty can be found in the most tragic of circumstances. I was reminded of this watching an episode of Offspring. That's that Australian television show that I watch on Netflix that I shared with you in a previous sermon. And Ann Gardner, she sent me a note this week saying that season 7 had arrived. And so I spent a couple of evenings this week binge watching the 10 episodes. I am so skilled at binge watching, I consider it a work of art for the modern time. But I digress. In this one episode, Nina, who is an obstetrician, is caring for a woman who is pregnant and in her final trimester. And this woman is particularly nervous because she's older, and she isn't married, and she had decided to have this child on her own, a kind of now or never leap of faith. And she comes into Nina's office without an appointment because she is nervous that something is wrong, but everything checks out. And Nina tries to reassure that this is a normal, anxious response to having a child, but she comes back again a few days later and says she hasn't felt the baby kick or move, and she is once again worried. And this time an ultrasound confirms that the baby's heart has stopped and the fetus is no longer viable. And the woman is understandably overwrought because her dreams and hopes and her future have disappeared. And worse, for the sake of her own health, she must deliver this baby the next day. And as the day unfolds, the nurses and the midwives of the hospital prepare a room for her. And they light candles, and they have soothing music, and they bring in art and blankets that are lovely and soothing, and they welcome this woman who is shrouded in tragedy into a holy place. And when she is suffering the pangs of childbirth and is offered anesthetic to dull the pain, she responds that this will be the only time she will experience this, and she wants to feel everything. And when the baby is finally born and her lifeless body is laid on her mother, she remarks that she'd heard somewhere that once a child with no heartbeat had revived at her mother's touch. This moment of hope. But it's not to be. And she is there in that room holding a child without life, with these wonderful caregivers there bearing witness to this tragedy. And later, when Nina went home and her partner asked her how the birth had gone, she described it like this: "It was the saddest, most beautiful birth I have ever experienced." Leonard Cohen describes this in his song, Anquist. I've had a rough couple of weeks for various reasons. Maybe some of you have too. And sometimes when in that space, I just sit and stew in my office wondering what to do. And I get lost in what's wrong instead of seeing the divine beauty of what is right. And this past week I was working away when a woman dropped into my office, and she's part of our community and often comes to Healing Touch. I told her I was going to tell this story, and she said fine. She's experienced a health scare recently that landed her in the ICU. And her first words to me when she saw me were, "Thank God for Tony Snow." Because he visited her while she was there and all alone. And that connection had meant the world to her. And as she described it to me, she was ready to give up. And she told God she'd had enough and wanted to go. But while she was unconscious, she described it this way. She said she must have gone to heaven to have a little chat with Jesus. And he told her that her time is not up yet, and to move beyond her pains and her frustrations, to know that God was present and surrounding her, as, and she described it this way, the Father, the Son, and the holy moment. I love that phrase, the holy moment. And we began to share stories of being available to the beauty that is all around, that demonstrates that God is present in small and insignificant things that are divine beauty. And my favorite image that she shared was about a spider who was weaving its web under her chair. And she couldn't see it because it was so small, but when the light passed over and all the silken threads of that web were visible, there he was, swinging back and forth and dancing up and down the web. A mischievous moment of divine beauty beckoning to the world. And I was listening to her describe this moment, and I remembered these words of Jesus. Think about those beautiful wild lilies growing over there. They don't work up a sweat toiling for needs or wants. They don't worry about clothing. Yet the great King Solomon never had an outfit that was half as glorious as theirs. Look at the grass growing over there. One day it's thriving in the fields, and the next day it's being used as fuel. If God takes such good care of such transient things, how much more you can depend on God to care for you, weak in faith that you are. And a sense of peace came to me. A visit with a woman who has experienced such tragedy, but who saw the beauty of a sunlit spider and marveled at the grace of God, was life-giving to me in a time of uncertainty. It was divine beauty. And as I drove home that evening in our first rain in this long, dry season, I saw a double rainbow reaching across the entire horizon, complete from end to end, with colors so brilliant I could make out each one. It was, to me, like God's art gallery, right there in our everyday, drizzly world. And I felt like crying at how beautiful it was. There is beauty all around, and it emanates from the heart of God. It says, "You are not alone." And it cries, "The world is broken and tragic and sad, but I am holding all of that with great love." And God saw that it was beautiful. Amen.